One of my favorite poems is The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. The opening line of the poem has become a legendary cliché. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary. The line immediately grabs you with the eerie, ominous foreboding that continues throughout the poem. This narrative poem tells the story of a talking raven's mysterious visit to a distraught lover who has lost his fair maiden Lenore, who in time seems to lose his soul to sadness and decline into a depressed form of madness. This poem is made of 18 stanzas of 6 lines each. The meter is trochee octameter, trochee feet per line, with each feet having one stressed syllable followed by one unstressed syllable. Poe originally sold the poem to the American Review for $9. Poe later did a follow-up on this work in an essay titled The Philosophy of Composition, where he stated that the poem was inspired in part by a talking raven in the novel Barnaby Rudge by Charles Dickens. He also borrowed the complex rhythm and meter of Elizabeth Barrett's poem Lady Geraldine's Courtship. The Raven was first attributed to Poe in print in the New York Evening Mirror on January 29, 1845. Although it made Poe widely popular in his lifetime, it did not bring him financial success, but it remains one of the most famous poems ever written. Edgar Allan Poe was born on January 19, 1809, to David and Elizabeth Poe, who were both actors by profession. Only 2 years after Edgar's birth, his mother died in 1811. He was then looked after by John Allan, a tobacco merchant. That is how he gained the full name Edgar Allan Poe. In 1815, he visited cities all across Europe and attended Miss Dubow's school in London from 1817 to 1820. He then returned to the United States and settled in Richmond, Virginia. Poe was accepted by the University of Virginia, but was quickly expelled for reasons unknown. After which time he moved to Boston and joined the Army under a fictitious name, Edgar Allan Perry. After joining the Army, he was accepted into West Point and was within a year expelled yet again for reasons unknown. He then moved again to Baltimore and very soon after was found mysteriously unconscious on a Baltimore street and died a week later at Washington College Hospital in Baltimore. It is interesting that throughout his life he wrote poetry of a mysterious quality, and then he died surrounded by mysterious circumstances. The poem, The Raven, narrative sets the stage for the poem. The first stanza, phrase, Midnight Dreary, and later The Bleak December, are use of poetic imagery, symbolism, a sonic alliteration, and this rhyme that radiates throughout the poem. Within the second stanza, he talks of ghostly embers on the floor which give the reader uneasiness. You feel the pain in his heart for the loss of the rare and radiant maiden that the angels name Lenore. Even before the raven arrives, the reader is set on edge with the uncertainness of it all, with satin, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain. He claims that it is thrilling, fantastic terror, while he is trying to rationalize that it is the wind and nothing more. The rapping is a use of audio emotion that continues, and when he gets to the door to answer the tapping, explaining in his head why he has been too long to answer the door, only to find that there is darkness there and nothing more. You feel the hairs raising on the back of your neck with the peculiar circumstances. In the fifth stanza, he ponders in silence in the darkness until he hears the whispered word, Lenore. He goes back into his chamber, shaken by the words, all my soul within me burning. Then the rapping becomes louder. He opens the shutter, and the stately raven of saintly days before enters and perches above the door on Pallas' bust. One would think an obvious symbol would be Pallas, who is a goddess of wisdom, would be used because the raven talks of wisdom. Poe explains in his composition that no, it was simply for sonorousness of the word Pallas itself. The bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, then lends to a mystified, curious encounter. He calls the bird grave and stern decorum of a countenance it wore, and then calls it ghastly, grim, and ancient wandering. He seems to know its origin, but wants to understand its purpose and its name, but the only reply is nevermore, leaving one to wonder what its purpose really would be. The emotions expressed about the raven's persona is felt with as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. This symbolism, I think, represents the man's sorrow and grief outwardly. As the man tries to relax and take it all in, he states, "Other friends have flown before." This represents death and how others passed over before Lenore. The bird breaks the silence again with its nevermore. He then tries to write the bird off as some fluke. It was lost and was kept by an unhappy master who had a unmerciful disaster, and the bird's hope was a melancholy burden bore of nevermore. He further depicts the bird by calling it grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and an ominous bird of yore meant croaking nevermore. He resents it and doesn't understand its purpose. As the bird's fiery eyes burn into his core, the uneasiness amplifies. He begins to shout at the bird in the 15th stanza, and he calls it a prophet or a thing of evil, or if bird or devil. He demands that it tell him if there is balm in Gilead. This term means a soothing ointment made in Gilead mountain region east of Jordan River. He shouts again at the bird to understand, "By God we both adore, to tell the soul with sorrow, it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom angels named Lenore." It seems that the bird is a manifestation of his sadness. He asks it to leave my loneliness unbroken. He wants it, or perhaps his sadness, to leave, but won't, and the terror he feels continues when he states, "His eyes have all the seeming of a demon that is dreaming. The light shows his shadow on the floor." This seems to be the man's decline into the depths of darkness of his sorrow, especially when the raven stays and the melancholy further deepens with, "My soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore." I think this clearly represents that the man's soul dies from sadness and the loss of his lover, and his mind depletes into madness.